Welcome to SHOWstudio. It's our second menswear roundup panel, and we're going to be talking about the shows over in Milan. Was a lot going on in Milan this season because obviously there's a lot of excitement around what Alessandro Michele is doing at Gucci. As always, there's excitement about Prada. There's also kind of Cavalli men's, which people were looking forward to. But I think subsequently after the season, there's also been kind of a lot of talk because obviously we've had a few sort of HR changes with designers leaving their positions and moving around and what have you. So we'll kind of delve into that as well. But before we kick things off, I'll let my wonderful set of panellists introduce themselves, starting with you, Chris.
Hello, I'm Chris. I'm style editor at mattisfashion.com.
Are you sure?
You need to forget every time.
I'm Mimma Viglezio. I'm a consultant and the editor of Lula magazine.
I'm Stephen Doig. I'm the men's style editor at the Telegraph newspaper.
I'm Andrew Davis and I'm creative director of Wonderland magazine.
Thanks, guys. So should we start by talking about what's happened after the season and before we dive into the shows? Because there's been a lot of changes subsequently and it feels like everyone's kind of giving up their positions, moving over. Stephen, Mimma, give us a little kind of rundown of what's happened and what's your take on it? Because you brought it up, so... Mimma.
Well, first of all, I was very surprised about Berluti.
Me too.
That for me was a real surprise because I thought he was doing really well. I thought he was doing what the brand needed. And actually, I thought it was amicable because when I read, press releases and stuff, I tend to think I know what's behind. So he was offered a job at Zegna and he thought, let's go back home and let's do it,
Do you think it's the problem of these 3-year contracts, which is something that's been written about quite a lot recently? Do you think that's part of the reason we're seeing people where they're at brands that are seemingly doing well and then...
Well, it's a little bit, on both sides. The 3 years contract, they don't really protect the people, but they protect the brands.
Yeah.
But also vice versa, because he can leave. It doesn't cost anything to Zegna because they don't have to pay another 2 years lead. So I don't know. I think if someone is good, they'll stay forever. If someone is happy, they'll stay forever, no matter what contract. So, so that was a surprise. I was quite surprised about Stefano Pilati leaving Zegna also because, as we were saying before, I think that was his best show.
Yeah.
My favorite shows of his at Zegna were the very first and this the very last. So that was a surprise. And then I was not surprised at Brioni because I didn't think it was very good. I was a little bit doubtful, but I'm looking at the experts for that. I don't know if it was selling, I don't know, but I didn't understand it. I didn't see where it was going, I didn't understand it.
I think everyone was most surprised about Stefano Pilati.
Yeah.
That's the impression.
And Alessandro also, I think.
Yeah, I suppose, but I feel like that makes sense to me. I understand going from Berluti to Zegna. I understand that move, and I am.
Yes.
But then Stefano Pilati, I find that more confusing to understand. It felt like Zegna was a really interesting place to be, where there's a lot of money there. I imagine the frustration was the fact that couture collection never really kind of found a wearer because you couldn't even really get it anywhere.
They didn't even produce it, so we can't say it's his fault because it didn't sell. No, so I don't know. They probably, when they say to the press, we needed a job for the image, and that was done. I think it's rude in a way.
Yeah.
It's weird, and you don't declare such a strategy.
Yeah.
So it's really weird.
Yeah.
That I don't understand. I don't know if you have insights, but.
What's your take, Steve?
I don't have any insights, but I agree. We were talking earlier, and that was the best collection but I thought the best collection he'd done. So I was, it was a big shock that his departure.
Yeah.
And with Brioni, I've always liked Brendan's stuff. I've personally always thought it's been traditional enough without being too staid.
Yeah.
And he's more and more he'd added elements that were more him, had a bit more flair. So that to me was quite a surprise as well.
Yeah. Where do we think Stefano Pilati is going to go? Well, where is everyone going to go?
The rumours are...
Stefano, the rumours are Lanvin.
Do you think that'll be a good fit?
I think, yeah. I think, as who was saying that before, they will sell a lot of jewelry and a lot of accessories and he will design amazing dresses. So I think, but it's really a rumour. I have no idea if it's true.
I think it's that tricky time where there's a lot of people coming out of contract because they're waiting for that Chanel job.
Yeah.
And a lot of designers want that job, and there's a lot of people available now. Hedi, Raf.
Hedi? So is it confirmed?
No, not at all, but I think all these people want that job.
Okay.
Even, Phoebe's been cited to do it. And I think that, so everyone loves these 3-year contracts because, they're done and they're dusted, and then they can say, well, do I want to live for a year and not work and stuff and just consult for people and then wait for that job. That's the one that they all want. It's a private company. They don't disclose anything. You know, the fee that the designer will be paid is the biggest one that anyone will get. So I think...
But Carl isn't saying
But also
that
it's having an effect on menswear now.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, you'd never think that Raf would do Chanel, but he's not in contract now and he's out of contract. It's like it's a very clever move by all of them, I think.
Who do you think is going to get that Chanel job?
Hedy maybe, because I think Carl will have some influence with the family about who it should be.
Yeah.
Although they might want someone totally different. They might want a woman, you know. Just hope someone as equally as bonkers.
It's interesting though, because you kind of talking, I'm conscious we need to get onto the clothes in a minute, but you're kind of talking as if those 3-year contracts, you know, are kind of good for designers. And I think there's been a lot that's been written at the moment. We were talking about this yesterday about the fact that, you know, the fashion system is crashing and what have you, and a lot of the talk is as if designers are having a really horrible time and, you know, the system doesn't kind of protect them, what have you. Would you disagree with that?
No. I don't think it protects them in the fact that they've got this freedom of movement, do you know what I mean, which I think is fantastic. The designers, the problem with Raf and a lot of the designers, they want the control over shops and beauty. And these are massive different entities, you know. These people that are at beauty brands have been there for like 50 years almost. You know what I mean? They've worked their way up. But like designers like Raf and all these young designers have been in college and then they're a superstar, and you can't touch that beauty business. It's too risky. It makes too much money. It supports everything.
But is it not confusing to the consumer? I was thinking about this a lot over Christmas, because obviously that's when the fragrance ads are really sort of out in force on television and what have you. And like, you know, we're all obsessed with kind of what Alessandro Michele's doing at Gucci, and then you saw that Gucci Guilty perfume ad where she's like on the motorbike and you're like, what
It's
the
old
hell?
Gucci,
Yes. Do you think that
Why
confuses
selling
the
Yves Saint
consumer?
Laurent? Same problem. And Hedy
Yeah.
and Hedy declared it to the press. I've got nothing to do with the YSL
But I think they've
fragrances
even made
ad.
it that feels almost in line. Like there's not that huge awkward divide. Whereas Gucci, like the way those perfumes are sold, and even like the names of them are so out of step. I wonder if a consumer is confused by that and by the whole process. Do you think when creative directors leave and what have you, do you think shoppers find it confusing?
Yeah,
Really?
I don't think the consumer cares.
No, 50 of us, that fashion forward audience, and the 50 journalists in the world, we care about the movements and what happens.
I agree.
I don't think that person that bought Dior and then Hedy left and it wasn't him, I think they're still that customer. I think the core customer is still there. It's keeping them excited, which is the difficult thing, but I think that nobody cares who moves around and who's the head of a house. My mother doesn't care, but she still buys into certain brands, you know what I mean? She's got no idea.
But then at somewhere like Matches, you know, you invest time now in the kind of content production and editorial side, you know, of writing about the designers, interviewing the designers, what have you. By educating the shopper in that sense, there must be an element of trying to get them to engage and understand. I guess...
Yeah, but that's someone who cares about fashion. Like, I don't know.
But I think the designers now engage with their audience, with their army, like Balmain and Instagram and things. That's a way of securing your influence on your audience and stuff. So there is that now. But we didn't have that, like, say, 10 years ago and stuff. So I think that's what's changed. So I think now it's becoming more relevant, maybe, that the people in the street will want to know who the designer is, but not so for the past few years. This is why I think this 3-year contract is perfect for everybody. I think it, you know, and if it's not working after 3 years, you know, it's hard to get press on a label at the second season if no one's into it. But as a new designer, it's so easy to get press on a new designer. It works. So it's like a whole new PR strategy. It's amazing. It's like reinventing
I'm not sure,
it.
but exactly from what you say, it's probably not that good for the brand. Because brands become a bit schizophrenic, and then, as you were saying, and if Olivier Roustin was leaving Balmain today, probably his tribe would follow him wherever he goes. And then suddenly, Balmain, whatever I'm inventing, Dior becomes Balmain. So, again, people don't care.
No.
But the brands can have a problem with that, because those top designers, they have a strong...
But I think
Olivier
Roustin's quite a special example of that, because I don't think there are actually as many designers who speak directly to a kind of consumer or audience or viewer as he does. You know, like, I know a lot is made of how many Instagram he follows.
No, I agree, but like, they still, if they're designer, you know, with a point of view, you can still see. I mean, when Raf went to Dior changed a lot.
Yeah.
And if Raf is going to Lanvin
but
would change.
It's not
the
same as Raf leaving and take. I agree. I think actually one of the houses that would be in most trouble if they lost their creative director would be Balmain, because he's brought personal friendships and what have you. And I think with Raf, yes, there's that aesthetic change when he leaves, but there's not like the faces of the label, all of those women who've kind of built that up into what it is through wearing it. Then that's just not, and I think that is quite rare. But that's why it's so interesting with Olivier Rousteing, because he speaks directly to. And
this is why I think people. He is a strong contender for Dior, because I think he'll be happy doing the collection. I think he's no interest in doing beauty. I think he just wants to concentrate on clothing. He's got his followers and stuff. And then I think pre-collections now are more and more likely going to be designed by CEOs and other teams. I think they're going to move away from that because they're constantly fighting to have repeats of things that have worked very well over the seasons, and I think that's what's going to happen. I think the designer will have that pressure taken off them. They've got to be a front man for the house, and they've got to do 2 collections a year, and couture of coutures in the house as well. And I think that's it. And beauty will be kept separate, and so will pre-collection and accessories even. I think, and that's the way forward, and that's the way they'll make their money.
It's strange, isn't it, bringing that right back to what we were talking about at the start though, because it's like if you think of a designer like Stefano Pilati, who just operates in such a different way, and it's like such a designer's designer in some ways, and it's really strange to think of how different the requirements are to be a successful creative director, because a lot of people, when they were talking about the Dior jobs, so I'm aware we've kind of gone off tangent, but when they were talking about that, kind of were talking about someone like Olivier Teskins or someone like that, but then I spoke to Tim Blakes about it, and he was like, there's just not the buzz around him.
No, he's not, and he's not engaged to an audience or plugged into anything instant.
But it's such a shame, because you think the best designer.
And he's a massive talent and could do that job easily,
It's very, very strange.
It's quite fascinating that they create a cult around themselves, these certain designers who manage to garner this almost preciousness around themselves, which kind of protects them against,
it does.
They don't move Olivier out of Balmain because he is Balmain. Which is kind of great that they've managed to.
I think it is great. I think it's interesting, just on that note, to start maybe by talking about Gucci, because that's something that's happened in a really complex and interesting way there, because obviously Alessandro Michele was kind of from behind the scenes, but I think very quickly, in a very different way to what we're saying about Balmain, it's not through kind of celebrity wearers and what have you, even though they do have a big red carpet presence. It's much more kind of just putting a stamp on it so quickly that now it's like he is the new Gucci. And what do we all think of this? You're a massive fan, aren't you?
Yeah, I liked it from the first time. Even when it wasn't his face, I think at the very beginning, people weren't sure what to make of it. But I could tell that I liked it from the start.
Because
it has got a bit wackier.
It's definitely got a bit wackier.
I think that his strength is that he's both. I think he's a designer. Coming maybe from accessories, but he knows about design. He grew into a very big machine where you need to be a designer, but he's also an amazing creative director. Then I also loved it from day one, but you can also not like it as a style, but I think he's got both.
But then when you see it, I love looking at it online, or like if you go on sort of Maxis, you go into the store, like there's a lot of pieces that aren't kind of kooky or wacky or infantile.
And there were some looks on there that were actually really played down. And
that's the genius, because then they actually sell it. Sorry.
That's all right.
Sorry.
What does everyone else think about it?
I mean, I remember that first show last January, a year ago. And I remember talking to you, and I was a bit on the fence and not quite sure how this would translate to.
I was a bit gushy. I could see straight away that it was a great move. Do you know what I mean? I'd struggled for 10 years to shoot a lot of Frieda's menswear, and for me it was a problem. And I loved her as a designer. I think she was an amazing designer and a great person, and she did great things for the company and with UNICEF and things, and I've got a lot of respect for her, but I needed this fresh new spin on something. And it's something that's been happening in London anyway, this kind of fey lady boy thing, as we said, that Jonathan had done, and I think they put an Italian spin on it and kind of owned it.
Because there is an element where it's quite masculine in the sense of that kind of like, foppish rather than fey, kind of relaxed rather than kind of awkward, and I think I've seen it styled in really interesting ways where it does become quite seductive, and it almost does make me think of that kind of Tom Ford, like lounging type thing, which is really interesting because it plays into, as you say, that kind of like girly, like androgynous thing, but it's also, it can be like even just that look, the tracksuit look.
If you take away the Velma from Scooby-Doo specs and the bobble hat, it's quite a cool wearable collection. Do you know what I mean? It's just breaking it down.
Yeah.
But I love this new narrative of this younger, cooler aristo that flops around Europe and is fun and that is interested in art and texture and fabric, and I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
And we're seeing him everywhere now. I think he's the fact that Michele's, you know, implemented is just, you know, this aristo is now walking in all the catwalks. It's just fascinating.
And I think he's not afraid of contributors and people working with him. You know, he's commissioned a lot of artists to work in China and young photographers to do exhibitions. Frida was very like her way, the only way, I'm running this ship. He's a very open person, which I think is great for the brand. Yeah. And it's a great thing to get press on as well. Yeah.
I thought that was a little bit Frida's problem at the end. She wouldn't want anybody to tell her what to do. And
no,
that's a very good
she opened
point.
a great museum and an archive and stuff, which is fantastic. And, you know, as I said, her charity stuff, but it's like, actually, you need to work on the brand.
Yeah. Well, this feels like a lot of conversations, doesn't it? Like, I love what they're doing with that Instagram, like all the different kind of like artists that they're getting in, and like, obviously they had Hari and F walking in the show, and then she took over their Snapchat, and it's kind of, it's sweet and it's silly in a way, but then that's what brands need to do. They need to kind of make content.
But I think it's a cooler way of engaging with your new audience, as opposed to Balmain, which I feel is quite forced and quite in your face and a little bit exclusive. I feel like this is a lot more inclusive, and you can look at those clothes and you could probably make that look yourself and stuff.
I've always been obsessed with designers that do this, where they make collections where people can buy into the brand without actually buying anything. I think that's amazing when people do that, and that's, I think, where designers, it feels so modern to do that. Like Medium Kirchhoff used to do that in a really interesting way, and I think this is, I love it for that, because it's actually the most sensible thing to do, because it means your look becomes incredibly popular, and it's a way of getting your message out there.
And this is why we liked grunge, and this is why I like Anna Sui and those things, because years ago you could do that look yourself and stuff, which is so good.
What do we think of the hats?
Fantastic.
I just love it. I just think there's such a sense of that he really loves what he does, and he's a maximalist, and he brings everything to the table that he you know, he just engages with, which.
But there's a mix, you know, there's a fedora for a traditional guy, and there's like this little Tibetan thing with a face.
Exactly. The amazing thing is that he has a very strong vision, and yet it's still open. Yeah. And it's, I don't know how to explain that, but he's very strong in his vision, in his ideas. I mean, when you go to the Monte Napoleone store, you understand it immediately, and yet you can still do it your way, and that's acceptable. As you said, you know, he created a new look that, and I think it's genius. I'm a total fan, and those hats are
beautiful. And I think don't let him have the pressure of having to deal with beauty and fragrance and all of that. If it's working, leave it. Don't rock the boat.
I just feel like if they did a fragrance now that was more in step with this,
it probably will.
Yeah, like, you know, a little kind of granny bottle.
It's been around
like,
for a year.
It would be kind of cute, wouldn't it? And I feel like it would do really well. Yeah, is it selling well for you?
It's not got like the Saint Laurent sort of effect. With that sort of like the rock and rolly thing that people always want to buy into. It's trickier, but I can see that it's gaining momentum. Yeah. There's certain things like the souvenir jackets and things they've been selling out.
Is it a different client than Saint Laurent? Do you know about that?
I don't really know.
You don't know.
I don't think the customers realise that those first 3 men's collections are not discounted. Yeah. And so I think people hold out, and I think that's what helps sales brands like Saint Laurent as well, because the minute it's discounted, everybody wants it as well as wanting it originally. These collections are not discounted, so you're going to have to get them and pay full price for them. The London store ran out of all those foppish shirts the first day. Yeah. And I think, and they didn't just buy like 3 styles. They bought quite heavily. So I think it does work. And I don't think he's going to be the most commercial designer. No. I think he'll end up doing red carpet that he's not so into, but I think that's a thing that the brand wants to do as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting to see people wearing it though. Like, it's on, you know, the cover of British Vogue, it's being worn on, and like obviously Harry Styles has been wearing it a lot, and it kind of feels like, I think it just feels very youthful in a way, you know, like I was thinking a lot about what we associate with luxury, and I think for a long time it has been that kind of quite austere minimalist look, and this is completely kind of.
But this feels like luxury.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Whereas before it was, you know, a great 2-button jacket, but you didn't feel it was super luxe. It may have fitted well, but the fabrics didn't feel really expensive, even though they probably were.
You can't do that much embroidery on the cheek, can you?
No, exactly.
It's a sense of detail within those clothes that are.
I mean, God, how much carpet is that? Look at the price of that. It's not allied carpet.
It's interesting what the effect that this has had. Sorry, dying. The effect that this has had on Milan in general, though, because for a long time it did really feel like Prada was the show that set the pace, and Prada was the fashion show. Everything else was the shows, you know, commercial things. But now I think with this, it really has like completely changed the pace, and it actually feels like, I always love the Prada shows, but it feels like more like this is in step with what's going on in fashion. You see the influence of this far more on other collections than you do what's happening at Prada. It kind of feels more like Prada is now, you know, Mrs. Prada doing her thing. It's very kind of isolated in that world, whereas this is very much an active part of the fashion conversation, which has been quite interesting to watch.
And I think when you have Gucci, Prada and Saint Laurent on a shoot, they sit quite well together on a girl in particular. You know, you can get that kind of girl, you take the hat off and things, and it's that, it's easier. You mix some of the other Italian brands in and you really struggle because you start telling two different stories, and which is quite difficult.
What did we think of, well, actually first, what do we think of the way that this is being sort of copied and ripped off elsewhere? It got me thinking a lot about J.W. Anderson. I wondered whether he was almost too early in some of his kind of foppish
definitely
menswear.
Ahead of his time with what he was doing. And I loved that we were all so shocked by it and people didn't get it, and then you'd see on the Daily Mail and it'd be like, is this fashion? Well,
because I'm thinking now, if he did done 2 seasons ago that Spring Summer 13, the ruffle collection that he did, like, would have felt really at the time. Whereas when he did it then, I think people liked it, but people thought it was maybe a bit gimmicky and a bit silly. And do we think that this has been the effect of him, or is this a kind of wider attempt to reflect societal change?
I think it's a bigger shift that has been, I think Alessandro, while at Gucci, he's been there for years, he's felt that he wanted to do that, and he's probably shown these things to Frida, and she's probably said, no, you know.
I think the fact that he managed to take out the first collection so quickly shows that he had it in him and he couldn't wait for it.
I wrote
he just needed to explode, and in the
explode,
meantime, J.W. Anderson was appearing, and in the meantime, other people, and it was like, I'm sure, because it cannot happen that quickly otherwise. And that drastically
I got the
different.
sense he had like a little desk in his office, and every time, as you said, he'd gone to her with an idea and it had been rejected, he'd like put it in a drawer. And then when he did the first collection, he got them all out and he was like, bobble hats.
Exactly. Everything exploded out, and I think it's amazing.
I get that it was mainly a women's cruise collection that was, you know, hanging around, and they were like, let's make that. They said that they remade the shoes in 3 days, and I don't think that's possible, even if you own the factory, to turn it around that quick.
Well, so what they said, it was 5 days for the whole collection.
I think it was a very simple, it was that flat mule, and then there was some fur around the back of it, and it was trodden down. I think, so those mules are in the show, they just altered what they'd got.
I think it's quite possible to do. It wasn't a big show. I think knowing that factory, I think maybe not 5 days, but 2 weeks. It is possible, because he had everything in his drawer already, you know, it was there, ready to go. And he also had his following within the team, so he had people that couldn't wait to do that. I just find his life really fascinating. I think it's kind of like it's almost quite old school in the way, as this designer as like, he's not really the designer as celebrity, but he is the kind of designer as this like mythical figure, where I'm like super intrigued by, you know, even like, you know, his partner's an academic and the way they live and what art he's into. I find it really, it's kind of aspirational in that good way, where I feel like he's really cultured and interesting, and I want to understand him as a man. It is, as we were saying, very different to the
I think his historical reference is really interesting. I think, you know, Tom Ford's era was, you know, 60s onwards, from art to fashion and everything, and I really liked that bit about Tom, and I think this is really interesting about him. It's a lot older in history and stuff, but it's so much more interesting.
Just speaking of Tom Ford, what do we think of the way that he's kind of referenced the Tom Ford era? Because obviously a lot was made in the first show of that. There was a women's wear look that Molly Bear wore that kind of was a direct copy of a look that Kate Moss wore. It was the turquoise shirt and the navy trousers. He did it in a much more kind of oversized, androgynous way, and then obviously they played the music from a single man as well. But have we felt that Tom Ford kind of conversation has continued in subsequent seasons?
And I think it's that part of ultimate respect for the guy. You know, he really turned around a house that was on its arse, and made it amazing. It was
I think it was a clin d'oeil to the turning around, something like, I'm going to do something shocking compared to
and
the
also
past,
this very quiet and private person. One way to get great press is to reference something else, and it's a no-brainer for all of us to write about it. So I think that's why he's very clever as well.
What's your take, Stephen?
I just think we're still seeing it now, the seductive kind of the silken element of the menswear. It does hark back to that Tom Ford era, which I think, you know, it's it's also aligning. It's not so much a fey guy that we're seeing. If he aligns it with Tom Ford here, it's quite masculine, I think. Because there was, if one thing, what about that guy that Tom Ford conjured up for us, it was masculinity and quite a high voltage sexuality.
Well, I was thinking also as well about what's going on at Vuitton with Kim Jones, and I think in a way this almost sits quite interestingly alongside elements of that sometimes, where it's even like things like that collection, not the one we just saw, the one before, where it was from Vuitton, where it was all the kind of silky bombers and jackets and stuff. And I think that's interesting, because when you think of Kim at Vuitton, you do think masculinity, you don't think of it as being kind of remotely fluid in its approach to gender. But then this, I think that's just what I find interesting about it. It feels like it is almost kind of for everyone. And I think the other interesting element of this is the age thing, like the way, because Tim Blanks and I spoke about this, where he said, I think it's less interesting for being genderless, it's more interesting for being generationless. And he was like, these are clothes that work on a kid as much as they work on an old person. And I thought that's really, really interesting, as well as it's this kind of respect for the way older people dress, or the things that older people own, and retaking. And I think that's really, really interesting, which is not an idea that I think you see in fashion very much. Like, age is still like the big taboo. But I think that's really fascinating, that kind of reclaiming vintage type thing, which I actually felt was also on show at Prada. I don't know if you guys agree with that it was often like, that kind of old costume, retaking certain elements.
I think the age thing is not only a style thing, it's also a cut thing, because if you take Saint Laurent, for instance, I don't see an older man, if he's not really skinny and fit, wearing it, while Prada or Gucci, they can, then you style it differently, but I think it's about a cut.
I see loads of older men wearing Saint Laurent.
Jimmy Golf.
Loads, like in the streets.
Well, they're the only ones who can afford it.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's like a spankly jacket. Like, it is like
Mick Jagger.
It's selling like
exactly, Mick Jagger, not
but
any 70 years old man.
No, maybe not 70, but I think 40, 50.
But I what I'm trying to say is that Hedi's silhouette is particularly tiny. We all remember Carl saying, I lost I don't know how many pounds to be able to wear Dior by Hedi Slimane. Well, I think if you look at this, Prada or Gucci, it's just a matter of styling it differently. But I don't know, you know better than me about men's silhouette, but I think it's...
Yeah, I mean, I think
it's generationless.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's the Gucci silhouette is probably easier access point for an older guy than anything by Saint Laurent.
Do you think people accept a skinny silhouette now, though? Do you think that's something that men are comfortable with?
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah. I agree. They're totally acceptable. I think it's veering away from that a little bit more now, I feel.
Into sort of flares and that kind of thing.
Just because I think men didn't completely accept it, if
really?
I may.
Really?
Well, I mean, it's not easy for a man who hasn't been a fashionista, who has a little bit of belly, to wear skinny.
No,
I mean, again, we are in the fashion industry.
It's a 5-pocket jean, with a boot cut.
Yeah.
I think it's a London thing, isn't it?
I don't know. No, I think skinny.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, I think you.
Yeah, and it's something that a lot of high street stores desperately trying to get out of, but it's their biggest seller. They're all fighting a slashed knee at the moment, but it's like it sells like crazy still. So it's not going to go anywhere.
I hate those jeans, where they're like really skinny and then both knees are slashed. Like,
that's the one. That's
the
biggest seller on the high street. From September to now.
Oh god! And it's like the skin like bulges out, and you're like. Anyway, what did everyone think of the Prada show? Because this is really, really like, I wanted to talk about it quite early on, because this was one that was like, all the critics kind of went mad for it, and it was like, the best Prada show in ages, so strong, so emotional, and I'm interested, was everyone equally as excited?
I just want the shoes, and I've not wanted Prada shoes for a long time. I've not wanted to wear Prada for a long time, and I'm quite interested to go in the store and look at this when it comes in.
Yeah.
So I think it engaged with an older customer that was really interested in it, that see something new there and wearable. I think that it feels really young, though. I think this to me feels like an old Miu Miu men's show.
Yeah,
I feel like I've seen a bit of it before, and I think that this should be Miu Miu menswear, and Prada should be slightly older, slightly different, equally as kooky. Older guys maybe, but I feel like this is very kind of Miu Miu and youthful.
Would we like to see the return of Miu Miu menswear?
Yes, definitely.
Do you think that will happen? Because there've been rumours, haven't there? I feel like the last.
Well, they have a new creative director, I think, and stuff. So I think maybe in the long run, maybe that's a thing. Fingers crossed.
How long has it not been?
It's been
7.
No.
Yeah. long time.
When did it? I actually can't remember.
Yeah, 7 or 9.
7 or 8
yeah,
years.
it's been a while.
I even forgot it even existed.
And in the interim, Milan Menswear started and grabbed that market.
Yeah, really grabbed that. Yeah.
And you know, took that silhouette and that customer and that style and that colour and everything. It was like, it's, you know, it's very like old Miu Miu.
Yeah. Did you like this show?
I love the show.
Yeah.
I think there's something, you know, it was the only show that I had like a real kind of, it sounds so ridiculous, but kind of emotional reaction, because the music, the way the models walked, the kind of melancholia to the whole thing. Maybe I was just tired after the end of the Yeah, I mean, I think the prints were, you couldn't pinpoint one thing and say that's, you know, I've got that, I know exactly what I'm going to write about, because you really had to sit down and think, which you do with Prada all the time, but this more than any other, you know, I felt was quite beguiling.
The prints were super interesting. I've forgotten how you pronounce the guy's surname. It's like Christophe.
Yeah, that's French. The French illustrator.
But yeah, he's a French illustrator. And when people first saw them, myself included, I thought they were like old paintings or old pictures. And then when you actually saw them, sort of backstage, what he's done is taken art or film or all these different things from over different years and worked them into a print. So each print had about 7 different paintings or what have you, or films or illustrations worked into it. And they did, Prada don't often do a lot of communication, but they sent this kind of notes for all of the different drawings with what was in them, and it was fascinating. And there was a really amazing one, I think, called The Important Ones, where it looked like kind of this like medieval or like, you know, 16th century etching of different people. Then you looked up close and it had like Freud in it, but it also had Nina Simone, and it was really amazing.
Yeah, I think it hasn't been discussed enough, because I think the idea behind that whole exercise is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And very important, you know, not only style-wise, but also as a discourse, as a
that idea of picking and
it actually looks
history.
very beautiful on the clothes. It's true that when you watch a show like this, you don't really see it, but from close, it was just amazing. And people have not discussed this enough.
Yeah. Just obviously it's a difficult time for Prada at the moment in terms of kind of from a business perspective. What do we think? Because you know, there's a lot of talk at the moment about the changes that we're seeing with people like Burberry and Tom Ford, and you know, Paul Smith has kind of talked about kind of streamlining his business, and the Italians haven't really got in on the act on that at all. Do we think that the mega brands in Italy, you know, the Pradas, the Guccis, are they going to have to respond to these changes? And will they? Because we always talk about Italian fashion as if, you know, maybe unfairly, as if it is a little bit slower. But I look at a Prada collection now and a Gucci collection, I think, you know, if Burberry are doing it, you guys need to keep up. What's everyone's... Mimma, you consult, I know a lot for...
Well, I don't think... I mean, I have people asking me from Italy, shall we follow? What shall we do? First of all, I think it depends on any brand and company in this case, and what they're doing, because, you know, being in difficult times sometimes is taken in a wrong way, because you can have negative growth, but it doesn't mean you're going bust. You know, you're still selling clothes. So I don't think Prada can be a follower. I don't think Prada can do what Burberry does as a principle. I think others will do it, but I don't think it's yet decided that that's the right way to go. We were discussing this the other day. You know, it's difficult. How do you do it? What do you sell before a show? How does that happen? So I don't know. I think the Italian feel the need to find a solution. I think, you know, Carlo Capazza, La Camera della Moda, he's pushing people to change and find solution, but I don't think anything will change for the next season.
Do you not think it's part of Prada's problem, God, that's really hard to say, has been a failure to keep up, though, with changes, you know, with, you know, famously incredibly kind of reserved and reluctant towards e-commerce and what have you?
Yes, probably, but it's very difficult for a brand that has a stamp as clear and strong as Prada to suddenly say, you know, let's be like Balmain or let's be like Gucci. That's what Prada is. It's Miuccia, it's her style, and so it's very difficult. But
well, I think their problem is they all pull. Brands like Prada pulled all of their clothes out of stores and independents and stuff, whereas Saint Laurent you can buy on Matches or you can buy it from Selfridges. Unfortunately, they thought that was going to strengthen the brand. It hasn't. Do you know what I mean? The fact that you can get it from different places is the strength. So they're going to have to build their website, and they're going to have to make it available a lot earlier because kids don't want to look at it.
Yeah.
6 months later.
Yeah,
I know a guy that buys a Prada suit will always be that customer. That's fine. But if you're talking to a new audience, they don't want to see it in 6 months. It's done. They want the next thing.
But
in
the
6
problem
months.
is, even if you want to wait, you go to the store and you cannot find. I'm talking women's here.
No,
you cannot
definitely.
really find what was on the catwalk. I think that's the first thing that has to change.
And I think people are going to
more
have to reduce
than
their
the
minimums
times,
and stuff,
because
definitely.
in the digital era, people see the show, so you see that coat, and then you go to the store and you don't want a black coat, you want
But
that
I also
coat.
think just even
That's
that
the problem.
pilgrimage of going to the store is not something that a new shopping audience engages with. Like, they don't want to make that. They don't want to make. They don't want to have to go to a store. They want to, you know, if they're browsing an e-retailer and they're looking at Saint Laurent and then a Prada, one of those printed shirts pops up, they want to be able to buy it. They don't want that kind of element of having to go.
But if you go to the store of Gucci, to go back to Alessandro, you feel you are in the show.
But then
it's so exactly the same thing, and you want everything.
Gucci elsewhere. That's the thing.
Yes, you can,
So it's kind of.
I think a pre-order thing is what happens with a few of the Italian online stores at the moment. You can pre-order your wrap. I think they'll do a pre-order thing, and if there's enough orders of that look, they'll put it into production, and it's not cost you anything. And you're engaging with an audience that's interested in a silhouette, so you have a record of what they like and stuff. And I think that's the way the data capture ideas of what the brand is.
What do you want with the buyers, the see now, buy now thing?
They just see it in advance.
I don't know yet.
You just buy in advance?
Yeah, they buy.
With Saint Laurent, they did the buy, and then the show happened, and then they had to do a second buy. But I don't know how Burberry will work. That'll be a whole new ball game.
But so then the show is dictated by the buy?
No, I don't think so, because they'll do the buy. They'll do the buy before. But
it isn't at the moment, but you watch CEOs will make it a point of reference.
Exactly.
Definitely. Yeah.
That's such a risk.
It's something selling, of course. Yeah, it's terrible, but
it's
that's
such a risk for creativity.
I think a lot of stylists struggle when they work with the Italian brands, because they come in, they've been booked for their creative talent, and then the commercial director sits there with 6 black coats, and it's like you have to include 4 of them, and it's really hard to work them in.
Yeah, it's
very true.
It's strange, isn't it? But I do think in a way the system has to, like, the way of doing it has to change. But I just can't work out what's the best system for it to be able to work. I think at the moment it's doing a disservice to the shopper and the consumer, and obviously they're important. And that's what this is for. But then the way it's changing is kind of not going to be very helpful for the industry. So it's this weird thing.
And then you've got the younger designers and the big houses who could make things quicker, but the younger houses, they need the time, don't they?
Yeah, I think they do, but then I also think Charlie Porter was saying this on the panel yesterday. He was like, it's also up to the younger designers to kind of not just kind of like blindly enter this system when they come out of college, and actually think of different ways that they can do things.
Yeah, that's true.
I think that is part of the problem at the moment. Is yes, younger designers probably can't, as you say, produce something quicker, but then it's like, why have they entered into the system in the first place and just accepted to do it that way? Because they can't when they're already within the system. But I think why engage with that? But then I guess you get to a point where if everyone's selling and showing differently, it just becomes kind of anarchy a bit. What's your take on it?
I think it's interesting actually to see what will happen with Burberry and the blending of menswear and womenswear together. I think it's something is really gathered force in last season Prada. There was a lot of talk about why was there an equal number of women's looks in pre-women's looks in the men's show. It's interesting to see how that's going to play out, because I wouldn't want the men's shows to get lost in the they
won't get as much press.
They won't get. Well, also I was thinking about that with Burberry are going to have to, unless they find like the most giant show space in the world, they're going to have to cut a lot of the press.
Yeah.
And usually think it'll be menswear editors that get cut, which is silly because menswear is growing so fast actually. But I did think it was interesting at this Prada show there were a lot less women's looks. She still always invites you to the men's and women's show, but as you say, past shows it's been pretty much equal. This one it was very much not equal. It was like a men's show, which was interesting. I do think though it's important for them to merge in a way, because it's very strange that we expect a designer to kind of split their ideas between the genders.
I think they complement each other, but it's true that if someone suffers, it's the men's side of the critics, of the buyers. So I'm sure that they will find a solution. I don't think that Burberry will just say, oh, let's cut 50 seats for men's critics. You know what I mean? No. Let's see what's happened, but I trust they will find a solution for that.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to go to the shows twice a year and not 4 times a year.
Exactly.
It would be great.
I think everyone will just produce better work if they're not always travelling. I always
make our lives easier.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But Stephen, what do you think should happen in Italy? Do you think that, you know, we need people doing buy, so sort of straight from the catwalk and what have you?
Christ, yeah, I think so. I think there's been a kind of Italy as a kind of gilded thing that's kept separate from the rest of the fashion industry.
Yeah.
I'd love to see it engage a little bit more, to be honest. Yeah, I think it has to happen. I think brands like Gucci have kind of been a step ahead in that, and I think other brands should take...
The problem is that they've been around for a very long time. I mean, if you think the Armani, the Versace, with all due respect, for them it's harder because they've been there, they've had huge success, financially speaking, and now suddenly, let's say, why do we have to change? Yeah. And that's the problem with Italy. It's been commercially very viable for many years. Fashion has completely changed. I mean, you've got new designers that are bringing on a completely different... I mean, I'm saying things that sounds banal, but it's very hard for Mr. Armani, who's worth what? The company's 7 billion, to wake up and say, oh, let's change the system.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? The guy's 84. It's like...
He's still going to show 7,000 looks in the theatre.
Exactly. And even, you know, I think Donatella is quite trying harder to adapt, and she's quite cool in her ways, but
and
these
Dolce,
people...
they had their iPads on the catwalk.
Yeah, but I don't think that's the answer.
Modern,
I think,
isn't it?
4 seasons
I think that's a little
4
bit...
years too
4
late.
years too late.
Yeah.
What did we think of the Dolce show and other shows that we haven't discussed
I don't remember
yet?
the Dolce men's.
I haven't really got an opinion.
I got banned.
You don't have an opinion? Or
I
you
like
do?
the pace of the Dolce show. It's look.
Yeah, it's quite fun, isn't it? You're like...
And I do,
If you get an invite.
I agree, the pace and the exuberance of the Dolce show, that's kind of maximalist, and it's you know, it's you just have fun and play with fashion a little bit, and there's a bit of sensuality in the pajamas. I just, you know, it's their what they do, and they love it.
Do you think it's because a lot of criticism gets levied at them? You know, they don't change; they're stuck in this thing. Do you think that's almost kind of, you know, it is what it is? Do you think we need to be a bit more like that with brands?
I think, you know, saying, you know, they don't change, well, you could look at a lot of brands and load that up.
I don't mind that. I'd like to recognize a brand.
Yeah. I think you know, they adhere to their aesthetic and have fun with it every season.
Yeah.
And they
I think that's important.
To different places, but
Do you sell Dolce Men?
Mm-hmm.
And
it's always the best top seller. Yeah.
really,
oh
Yeah,
really?
Probably more of the classic-y stuff, but you know, it's a really famous brand. People want to buy into that, don't they?
Yeah.
Their pajama shirts are apparently selling massively now as well.
Yeah.
Everyone's into pajama shirts. They've always done it.
So why would they?
Don't do a
change?
T-shirt with James Dean on it, and you know,
and it sells.
It sells. Yeah. The Paris collection's probably massive for us, and I'm trying to think of a key piece from spring summer, which like the floral bombers, they'll do really well.
Yeah.
T-shirts with monkeys on. They were very big.
You're not a fan?
No, Chinese New Year. They're very clever at a
Yeah.
trend and a thing.
Yeah.
They're very apt at that.
And there's
they're
fabulous.
very good at doing luxury. I understand that.
Yeah.
I think they should just be amazing designers. I think they should let other people do their seating plan and their PR. They should have an outside person influencing them.
Yeah.
Cutting people just because you don't shoot the clothes, it's not a very modern or
No.
good way to get support, I don't think.
They've banned like so many critics.
Yeah, people that have worked with them for 20 years have been banned. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's really, really strange. It's just not modern.
No.
No,
It's
they
really,
have that
really
old-fashioned
strange.
attitude to criticism also.
But I don't know, maybe that's... So does Saint Laurent, and that's supposed to be the most modern brand around, you know, and they're exactly the same. So it's, I don't know, I just think it's kind of how stuff is, isn't it?
But Cavalli...
Yeah. Okay, what were your thoughts on Cavalli?
I think if you look at old Cavalli and you see where fashion is moving, I feel like that Gucci feels that there's elements of old Cavalli in Gucci.
Yeah,
that
sure.
embellished, that, you know, Aristo kind of kid. I think I like this really modern way that it was all styled with Converse and it felt young. It wasn't full looks, which I think is quite nice. I think it's broken up because they've seen the success of Gucci and that kind of broken element to stuff. It feels a little bit vintage.
Yeah.
I really like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant.
It's interesting, that vintage thing, because you know, I feel like that's, I don't know if it is because it is just so hard to actually buy vintage now.
Yeah.
But like everyone doing, like Alessandro Michele called it like fake vintage. Yeah, I think he actually said that.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to see that, you know, it's exactly what Saint Laurent did. It's like, you know, pop off somewhere in LA, buy a jacket, bring it back to the studio, copy it, churn it out. It's that kind of thing, but there's obviously such a market for it. I wonder if it is to do with the fact it's so hard to get good vintage.
Yeah, definitely.
People are
I think
lazy.
everything's pilfered now to death. And also, you know, for the past 10 years, vintage was a bit of a swear word again. No one really wanted to wear vintage. And vintage was so expensive, students weren't even wearing vintage.
Yeah,
I mean?
it's so expensive now. Like you
really
can't.
Is. Crazy prices.
Yeah. Did you like the show?
I did like the show, and actually, I liked the show, and then I sort of there was a lot of negativity around the show.
Yeah, a lot
I
of
went back to it.
negativity.
No, actually, I actually do like it. And I agree that there's the sense of vintage thing, I think, is connecting with we kind of want a bit more soulfulness from our clothes. We want a little bit, we don't just want to, like, you know, a double-breasted suit, which is great, but we want a little bit more soulfulness and, you know, the sense that we've...
But then it's that weird irony, isn't it, where it's like new, but then it pretending to be vintage.
And
There's no soul.
£2,000.
Yeah, exactly. Why do you think there was so much criticism?
I think I didn't particularly like it because I see exactly what you said about Gucci. I think it's that Gucci.
I mean, yeah,
without
denim,
the happiness.
this denim look is the Gucci tracksuit.
Yeah, but
without
without the happiness, without the desirability for me. I don't know why, but I look at this and I feel vintage dusty.
Yeah.
And then I look at Alessandro's men's show and I feel joy and desire. So
But Alessandro's is a lot more mixed up. It's a lot more eclectic. Like there's also like a Snoopy t-shirt. It's like, I think it's like completely kind of like madcap. Whereas this is much more a particular aesthetic, a particular generation. Whereas Alessandro is like, you know,
this all looks a bit 70s. Whereas
exactly. For me, it's a little bit 70s. It's like it's a little bit costumey.
Yeah.
And I know, I mean, you really liked it, so maybe it's offensive what I
really
said,
like
but
it.
I was
It was
looking
his
at
favourite
it.
thing about that.
It made me feel like they're going to a costume party, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't like that. I don't like it in a fashion show. It's too much. You know,
I just like the
hair
casting
and
as well.
makeup and everything.
It feels very cool. It feels different to Gucci as well, which is really hard to get away from.
Yeah.
It feels different to Prada. It's not that austere aesthetic, that Scandi boy. It's like this loose kind of sullen kid, which I really like.
Yeah.
You know, it's an English stylist, and the women's was an English stylist, and I like that combination of an Italian and an English person.
Yeah.
Or you know, a European and the English.
I did hear someone say there was a sense of cynicism to it when I was in Milan, which you know, that could maybe it is a bit cynical to just you know everyone's in the 70s, everyone's looking at Gucci, bam, let's do it like that. I didn't feel that sense, but someone did say that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think that is it's that problem, but then I think you can levy that criticism at a lot of things. Like you could almost levy it. You could have done it with what Alessandro is doing at Gucci and say, oh, he saw what's happening in London. You know, I think that it's easy to do that, but it's also it's business, isn't it? You know, this aesthetic is doing well. People are going to jump on a bandwagon. But then I think big picture, I think it's interesting and exciting that this is what feels good and popular in menswear, because if you think, you know, it's championing a very different kind of man to what we've seen in menswear, you know, for a long time. It is very much about broadening, you know, ideas of male beauty and ideas of what's fashionable, and that's really exciting that, you know, you're seeing that in Italy. Yeah. What's your take on that?
Well, absolutely, and I think it's completely changing. In a way, it's changing the industry, but in other ways, it's also following the fact that the men's industry has changed. You know, men, even non-fashion men, they're becoming more conscious about what they're wearing, and of course, this is stimulating all of that. Yeah. So I love that, absolutely. This particular look of this show didn't do much to me, but I've got nothing against, you know, the fact that it's putting people in jeans with embroidered jackets on a catwalk. Absolutely.
But it's alongside Gucci and Valentino and that fast fashion customer that wants something new, that feels a little bit retro, that kind of feels that's embellished and stuff, that looks kind of wealthy, even if it's fake or fake wealth. I think it's great.
Who have we missed? There's a lot of people we haven't talked about.
Valentino, for instance.
But that's Paris.
That's Paris. Sorry.
Stay on topic, Rina.
But they're Italian, so sorry. You mentioned Valentino.
When we're done with all of this embellishment, I like that Jill Sanders is very different to everything, and it's cleaner and it's a lot more.
I haven't been a fan at all of the last 2 menswears.
And I think we sat together and been horrified.
Yeah, last season I was like, oh, dear.
I feel like this is going somewhere now. I think it's going to take him time to get on his feet. I mean, you know, you're coming after Raf Simons and you've got a massive legacy of Jill herself.
Yeah.
But, you know, they've got an amazing archive, and I think you can slowly see the influence of old Jill. I mean, this is a Jill Sander classic colour palette. This is what she was known for.
And those kind of square shape.
But I like that the casting's a bit different for them, and I think there's a lot more risks being taken. It's you know, it's a pared down silhouette.
It's also an English stylist.
Yeah,
which is nice.
Which is great.
And
I think
it shows.
I think
that's the good part of it.
They haven't told the story of Rodolfo Pagliuca very well. I don't think, you know, he's a super interesting guy, like all that time at Prada. Like, I think super interesting, but it just hasn't been communicated that well. Like, I think and it comes back to what we were saying about Gucci and brand building and storytelling. It's like his story has been told so well, and it seems really romantic, you know, behind the scenes for so long, blah, blah, blah. And it's exactly the same here, behind the scenes at Prada for a long time. And I feel like, why haven't we all been seduced by that as a story?
Less powerful brand. Less powerful
It's less Insta-friendly, isn't it?
But I think it's easier for that guy that may want to spend a lot of money on a jacket who would buy Stone Island or something like that. This is that guy, do you know what I mean? I mean, I don't think he's going to wear a sleeveless leather tunic.
But I liked it because it reminded me of when, it didn't at the time actually, I sat with an editor who was like, oh, it reminds me of that Raf fetish show, you know, where he did all the black.
A little bit, but I think the silhouette's a lot bigger and stuff. I mean, that was very young, that collection and stuff. I think this feels kind of like you could gear it towards that collector of fashion as well, that guy that wants to buy something simple but that has got disposable income and stuff.
What did we think of Fendi? Because a lot of people...
And that was fun as well.
Yeah, that was fun.
There was a blue coat that we really liked.
Really?
It matches men team.
Because I've sat with matches before and they've hated
blue.
So that was good.
Wrap around, like a dressing gown oversized.
Yeah, and everyone got very excited. But Simon Chilvers loves the kind of dressing
gown. I love this collaboration that they'd worked with John Booth, and I think that bringing that English stylist in and bringing this, these new ideas, I think that's really exciting. I mean, we all want that fluffy bag. It's ridiculous.
That bag is fantastic.
It's amazing.
I think it was very clever to kind of tap into what's happening now as well. There's just a kind of fluidity to it. They've always been quite fluid, you know, the furs and what have you, and the textures. But I think there's a kind of sensuality to those pajama things and the dressing gowns that is kind of it's working with what we're looking at now, which is a sense of lightness and a sense of, you know, a more fluid.
And this feels younger as well.
Guy. Yeah.
It doesn't photograph as well as it was, because when you watched it, I really agree with what you're saying. It was like super kind of sensual, sexy pajama. Like, I think the music really helped because it was like Barry White, wasn't it? And it was like really, really like come to bed. But then when you see it, it looks a bit harder, whereas it felt super fluid when you watched it. And I was happy this time because the runway was fake fur this time, which was good.
Which is much better.
Because I thought it was disgusting when they did it in real fur. It was awful. But so that was good.
And I like that throughout the show, over the looks, it grows up kind of. And towards the end, it feels a slightly older collection, a little bit more commercial. But, you know, you have to show these things, so unfortunately. And it's hard to mix the two within a show. And so to slightly separate them, but to tell a story, I think is very clever.
Fendi Men's was a weird one, though, because it's another one where I'm like, who actually buys it? Where does it go? Do you know what I mean? It feels like the weird one where you're like...
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, those fashion-forward, crazy kids that want to buy bag bugs and, you know, face bags and stuff. But then there are guys that go in and that want a really great leather jacket, and that you'll go to Fendi. Definitely. The English store, like, is crazy busy sometimes. It's quite mad.
It's scary though with Fendi, because I think one thing they're really good at is these like little hits, like the bag bugs and those kind of things. But then it's kind of like the Valentino trainer. It's almost like when your business is really tied to like one thing that's doing really, really well. How do you kind of pull that back? Do you phase it out?
And then they would have fought that with the baguette and the women's wear, do you know what I mean? But they managed to get out of that kind of accessory. Guys, I think.
Maybe it's just a transition thing that, you know, you go from the baguette to the bag bugs, so it'll be something else that's a new, you know, decipher for the house. But does it sell well in matches?
Really well.
Really? That's interesting.
The accessories?
Fendi's like in our top accessories.
Yeah,
and
that's
it's all
interesting.
Faces. Monsters.
Monsters.
And behind this collection there's like a ski collection, which is really well thought them. There's lots.
We haven't talked about Armani, we haven't talked about a lot of things. Were there any surprise highlights that came along?
Armani changed a lot.
Yeah?
Well, if you look at Armani, if you've watched
I thought you were
Armani for
joking.
17 years, no,
Armani, which
everything
one?
Emporio.
The Armani, the main collection, you know, the shoulder changes
Yeah.
every season in the jacket. I don't think it's for everybody to notice all of these differences, but if
Yeah.
you've watched a lot of shows, you know. I've watched quite a few Armani ones. Yeah, the silhouette's a lot more different.
Yeah.
The shoulder's different. There's a lot more relaxed looks and stuff. You know, it's not something I'm going to go out and buy, but I think it's great.
For the man that does.
For the man that does, definitely.
Was there...
And Mr. Armani's been one of the oldest people to mix men and women within a collection. You know, we all think that Prada are revolutionary for mixing pre-collection with, you know, Mr. Armani did this 25
doing
years
it
ago.
forever.
He's been doing it forever.
Yeah.
He always put a woman.
Or everything that we think is modern and crazy and new, you can tie it back to Mr. Armani or Mr. Saint Laurent.
I even prefer Armani's men than women, personally. I think it's better, it's more interesting.
I think the way he mixes men and women is quite different from Prada, because often it feels like there's a narrative to it. It's like, oh, this is the wife of the male model, you know, this is the girlfriend. Whereas with Prada, there's no kind of weird romance narrative, you know, which is quite like, even the way he sent them out as like walking down together. I think that's quite...
Oh, he wants that to
it feels a little bit dated, you know, that kind of like...
But I feel like with him and brands like Calvin, it's not this collection that's keeping the business going. It's underwear and fragrance with him and other brands. This is just a prestigious thing that they do for promotion and stuff and press, definitely.
Does that still work as a strategy? I find it really weird that that's still happening.
Armani, I don't know men, but Armani sells clothes more than any other.
More than Calvin.
But also he has all the diffusion lines that sell.
Definitely. But within the show, you know, we'll see a crop top and stuff. I don't think men are buying them from Armani, definitely. I think it is that, you know, camel coat or that black 2-button jacket or... Yeah.
So was it a strong season in Milan in general, would we say, or is it still the case where, you know, Milan is sort of pulled up and made exciting by these one or two shows? You know, now it's Gucci and Prada, before it was Prada, you know, or is it now that we're excited about what's going on as a whole?
I thought it was exciting.
Well,
I thought it was more exciting because I think these one or two shows are having an effect, you know, trickle effect throughout Milan. And I'm not saying it's copying at all. I'm saying there's just a different sense of a bit of joie de vivre, maybe.
Yeah, it's a new pace.
There's a new pace and there's a new excitement, and there's a sense that creative directors can push the boundaries a little bit, I think.
But I think they're allowed to push these boundaries because they're like, you know, we're failing in China, we're not doing this, there's got to be something good about the brand to talk about, so let's get someone new in, or let's make something new and newsworthy. Yeah, it's
almost like the benefit of things going wrong is people tend to like
definitely
do interesting things.
Yeah, because if everything would have been fine in China and everything had been fine with stores, we'd have some very boring clothes to look at, I think, definitely.
I think it was more exciting, again, thanks to the effect of those 2 or 3 brands that stimulate creativity in others. But I also think that the big sellers are the Zegnas and these people. I mean, in China, I think he's the only one selling today. So, you know, again, it's not as exciting as London because it's not fashion-wise exciting, but business-wise, men in Milan is probably the most important.
But I think it is the most important, but I think it's not the most exciting. That's what I mean. There's not any business innovation happening there, and I think I'm more interested actually even by London still in terms of the business, because I know Burberry, like, say what you want about it, it does always feel a little bit kind of like, you know, market research, what have you, but like they are the ones that innovated with tech. Now they're the ones that are innovating in terms of like scheduling, and I don't look to Milan and feel interest. I know they're the big business, but I'm not like, oh, what is Zegna going to do with their strategy for that? You know what I mean? Whereas I am interested.
Well, it was interesting when they hired Stefano Pilati, though. So they tried, but then they say, oh, he's done his job. He just needed people to notice. And you're like, what are you talking about? You know, why you're saying? Weird. So I don't think we can expect a lot of changes from Milan, but this season was probably a little bit more interesting.
We all have to hot-foot it and buy a Gucci cat hat to get us through the season. Should we give them a round of applause if anyone doesn't have anything to add? Do you have anything to add? No? Should we give them a round of applause to wrap things up?